A blind Apache woman stands trembling on the auction block. The paper says she's bound, like cattle. No one speaks until Jonah Pike, a quiet cowboy, lifts her onto his horse and rides away. He never asked for trouble. But now, his land dries up, his fence is slashed, and a crooked banker says she belongs to him. Jonah won't shoot first. But he's watching, listening, waiting. And somewhere, buried under the snow, is the truth that could burn everything down. What would you do if mercy made you a target? The wind scraped down Main Street like it meant to peel paint off the buildings. Dust rose with every footstep, curling at boot heels and wagon wheels, then settling heavy on the shoulders of folks too used to looking away. Jonah Pike stepped off the porch of Mercer's General Store with a small sack in one hand, coffee, salt, a handful of nails, and a lopsided paper bundle of horehound candy for the stable boy. He was halfway to his horse when the shouting started. Open bid stands at $3. Who'll give $4 for a strong back and a silent mouth? Voices laughed. Boots shuffled. A shape was pulled forward onto the flatbed wagon. She stumbled. Her hands were bound, wrists tight in front, and a faded red shawl was wrapped around her shoulders like an afterthought. But it was her eyes that silenced Jonah mid-step, clouded over, unfocused, searching air instead of faces. A blind woman, Apache, and someone had tied a price to her. Jonah didn't move, not yet. His jaw flexed once, the way it did when the branding iron got too close to knuckle skin. The auctioneer barked again. $4 to Mr. Finch, do I hear 5? A man near the saloon held up a tin cup like it was currency. Laughter again. Then a slick voice. Too clean for this town. $10, binding contract included. Heads turned. Cole Maddox, banker turned land grabber, stepped forward like he owned the sun. His coat was pressed, boots polished, hat brim sharp. One of his clerks, young, nervous, scrambled after, him waving a folded paper. Jonah set his sack down slow. 1 heartbeat, 2. Going once. He didn't know why his feet moved, didn't remember crossing the dust between them. Only that when the blind woman flinched, sensing too much noise and too little mercy, he was there, one hand on the wagon's rail. Going twice? Jonah's voice came low. Give me the paper. The clerk blinked. Sir? I said let me see it. The boy shoved it forward, relieved to be rid of it. It just needs a mark, ink or thumbprint. We'll file it clean, binding as of today. Jonah read. The language was slick, legal. Words like transfer, custody, placement. No names except the signers. No mention of the woman at all. Just a description. Female, mid-20s, impaired sight, tribal descent, unknown. Why her? Jonah asked quietly. Cole Maddox smiled. Because she'll work without backtalk, and she won't recognize the men who visit. Efficient. Jonah's fist clenched. But he didn't raise it. Instead, he looked at the woman again. Her chin had lifted. She was trying to hear, trying to decide if he was just another set of boots come to buy silence. He turned to the clerk. Where do I mark? Here. Jonah pressed the page against the wagon rail and signed Jonah Pike in clean script. Someone cheered. Another man hollered, Well, hell, Jonah didn't take you for the romantic type. He didn't answer, just stepped up, reached for her arm, not grabbing, just letting his hand rest there until she felt it. I'm Jonah, he said. Can I lift you down? She nodded once. Her hair was long, dark, unbraided. She kept one hand tight on the shawl. He swung her down in one motion and carried her to the horse. She stiffened at the saddle but didn't pull away. Once mounted, she settled behind him, hands folded in her lap. The ride home was quiet. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. That night, He gave her the bed and took the wooden chair by the fire. The paper sat on the table, folded neatly. Outside, the wind blew dry across the hills and hooves scuffed the dirt just beyond his fence. Someone rode past and spit. By dawn, hoofprints circled the gate. By sunup, Jonah Pike was up to his elbows in fence wire, sleeves rolled, mind fixed. The wind had shifted, colder now, carrying the bite of snow on its breath. The hoofprints from last night didn't fade. They circled like a warning, casual, deliberate. The paper still sat on the table inside, untouched. But when Jonah stepped into town for supplies, something else was waiting. Nailed to the public notice board outside the land office, a typed page, crisp and smug. Reassignment of spring water allotment. Claimant, Jonah Pike, relinquished under binding transfer. New holder, Cole Maddox, land and cattle, effective immediately. Jonah stood reading it for a long time. He didn't move when Buck Reno swaggered by, chewing on a toothpick and grinning too wide. "Shame about that spring," Buck said. "Heard you signed it away." Jonah turned slowly. "Signed no such thing." Buck shrugged. "Paper's paper. Maddox says the contract makes her his. And you took her in. Water's tied to household labor. You lose the girl, you lose the claim." Jonah didn't reply, just stepped off the boardwalk and headed for the feed store. By midday, the wash behind his cabin had slowed. Not dry, not yet, but sluggish. Sick, as if something downstream had stolen its breath. When he got back, the woman was out near the chicken coop, fingers resting on the fence rail, head tilted like she was listening to the earth itself. She turned toward his footsteps. "I heard 2 men. One laughed like he meant to be heard. Jonah nodded. "Buck Reno's crew. They're Maddox's hounds." She was silent a long time, then said softly, "My name is Tala." He set down the sack of oats. "Tala. That's a strong name. You didn't ask before. Didn't want to rush what wasn't offered." That night, stew boiled low over the hearth. Jonah didn't talk much, but the knock at the door brought someone who did. Widow Alma Reyes entered with a cast-iron pot under one arm and a sharper eye than most men in town dared meet. "Heard about the notice," she said, setting the pot down. "And the pipe crew who came through 2 nights ago, quiet as moths. Harlan Finch saw 'em. Claims they laid something behind the ridge." Jonah poured coffee. "That ridge runs past Pike Wash." Alma raised a brow. "So it does." Another knock. This one gentler. A boy's face peeked through the doorway. "Ike," Jonah said, motioning him in. The orphan stable boy scuffed his boots and held out a piece of wood. "Found this behind Maddox's barn. He don't know I was there. It's from a crate, stamped Maddox Ditch Company." Jonah took the board, fresh cut, still smelled of pitch, a carpenter's edge. Alma stepped beside him. "You've got more than stew here, Jonah. You've got witnesses, clues, and folks who remember what fair used to look like." Tala reached forward slowly. Her hand landed on the board, then traced the stamp with 2 fingers. "This wasn't buried long." "Still has sun in it," she murmured. Jonah met Alma's eyes. "What I need is the ledger, original claim for Pike Wash, and someone who knows how to read through ink smudges." Alma smiled, pulled a pencil from her braid. "Been reading deeds since I was 12. I'll come with you tomorrow." "I'll go too," Ike offered, straightening. "I know where Maddox stores the new pipe." Jonah looked at them all. A widow with fire behind her eyes. A blind woman who listened harder than most men saw. A boy who knew how to slip between shadows. And an old prospector somewhere up the hill with a sharp memory and louder opinions. He didn't have much, but he had enough. That night, after the stew cooled and the house went quiet, Jonah folded the reassignment notice and placed it beside the other paper. He didn't burn either. Truth needed proof. and patience. By morning, that hollow wash would tell him more than Maddox meant to reveal. By sunrise, the air had thinned to brittle cold. Ice skimmed the horse trough behind Jonah's barn, and the wind whistled low through bare cottonwoods. Jonah and Alma rode out early, Ike trailing behind on a mule with ears longer than his patience. The county recorder's shed sat behind the town chapel. One room, stone foundation, padlocked door, and dust in the window panes. Alma picked the key from a hook nailed under the eave. "Reverend trusts me," she said simply. Inside, the air was stale with old paper and beeswax. A potbelly stove leaned crooked in the corner. Wooden drawers ran wall to wall, each labeled in script faded by decades of sun. Jonah spoke low. "Look for 1870s filings, domestic allotments, Pike wash basin." Alma nodded, pulled a stool, and got to work with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. "You keep an eye out the window. I don't like surprises while digging in ink." They sifted through brittle folders and uncatalogued ledgers until the room turned golden with mid-morning light. Ike dozed on a pile of feed sacks. The room was quiet, save for the sound of pages turning. Then Alma stilled. Her finger tapped the corner of a thick brown ledger. "Here," she whispered. "Filed 1874. Pike wash domestic use, household first." That's not just a cattle supply. That's foundational. No transfer without household continuity and a notarized witness. Jonah stepped closer. "And the contract Maddox used? No witness. No notary. Just your signature, pulled under false pretense. He can't reroute water unless you forfeit the household claim. And you haven't. She's still here." He nodded once. "Then we've got a foothold." They made a copy of the entry and tucked the original back neat. As Alma packed her satchel, Jonah scanned a nearby shelf. Something tugged at his memory. His father's boots, heavy against porch planks, a voice saying, "If anyone ever tries to claim what's not theirs, check the family folder." He found it under P. A faded green binder tied with leather cord. Inside were scraps of account notes, a cattle count from '78, and a sealed envelope marked, in his father's handwriting, "Pike, open if challenged." Jonah didn't open it. Not yet. He slipped it into his coat and exhaled through his nose. "Let's get home." Back at the ranch, Tala was kneeling beside the wash. Her hand skimmed the water, slow and thoughtful, her head tilted to the side as if listening to a song no one else could hear. "There's a hollow," she said, not turning, "where the water used to sing. Now it chokes, but I can feel the shift in sound." Jonah stepped beside her. "A hollow where?" She pointed, not quite straight, but within 10 feet of where the natural bend of the wash ran behind a thicket. Alma squinted. "Could be where the new pipe starts." They'd need to bury it deep to stay hidden. Tala's fingers brushed the soil. "There's frost here, but it's thinner. Ground disturbed, still settling." Jonah nodded. "We'll dig careful." That evening, Harlan Finch showed up with a rusted lantern and a canteen of something too strong for most men. He squinted at the wash and spat. "In the dirt. Pipe crew came right through here, I swear it. I saw 'em lay line under moonlight. Didn't stop 'em 'cause I thought it was legal." Jonah handed him the ledger copy. "Wasn't. And now we've got proof." Harlan grunted. "Then it's time we bring this to someone who'll listen." Jonah touched the envelope in his coat. He hadn't opened it yet, but the weight felt heavier now. The truth was buried, but not deep. Tomorrow, the church picnic would offer more than pie and speeches. It'd offer questions, and just maybe, a witness or two. Sunday came quiet and cold, with frost clinging to wagon wheels and steam rising off horses like prayers. Dusty Creek's townsfolk gathered near the chapel green, arms full of pie tins and folded quilts, trying to make the most of a thin harvest season and tighter hearts. Jonah Pike stood at the edge of it all, hat low, shoulders squared, gaze steady. He hadn't come for cobbler or conversation. He came to listen. Beside him, Tala moved carefully, her hand lightly, resting on his forearm. She wore the same red shawl from the day he'd lifted her off that wagon. It hung different now, like something she chose instead of something thrown over her. They found a bench under the cottonwood tree. Jonah handed her a plate with a fork and a scoop of something that smelled like peaches and cinnamon. She smiled faintly, nodding her thanks. "Smells like summer trying not to end," she said. Jonah gave a soft grunt of agreement, then scanned the crowd. Cole Maddox was easy to spot, shining like an unwanted coin. He wore a pressed gray coat and black gloves, all polished manners and empty warmth. He moved from table to table, complimenting pies, shaking hands, and dropping casual mentions of improvements to water flow and private investments for community good. Near the cider barrel, Buck Reno laughed too loud at something that didn't warrant it. 3 of his men lingered nearby, boots muddy, eyes restless. Jonah kept one hand on the folded claim copy inside his coat. A child tugged on Widow Alma Reyes's skirt and pointed toward the pie table. Alma gave Jonah a wink and moved off, whispering as she went, "Give it 5 minutes. They'll overtalk themselves." Jonah didn't have to wait long. Maddox had set up a makeshift podium, really just a barrel with a cloth draped over it, and began a smooth speech about order, expansion, and reliable distribution of limited resources. Tala leaned in. "He uses many words to avoid one." "What word's that?" Jonah asked. "Stealing." He gave the faintest smile. "I was thinking the same." Then movement caught his eye. A young man, no more than 16, stood nervously by the bake tent. Alma's nephew, if Jonah remembered right. Name was Sam. Good kid, scared of horses, sharp with numbers. Jonah rose slowly and approached. "Sam?" The boy jumped a little. "Mr. Pike, you were hauling late last week. After dark. What did you see?" Sam hesitated. "I wasn't supposed to say." Jonah didn't pressure him, just waited. Finally, the boy looked down. "Saw Buck's men over by your wash. Midnight. They had shovels and a wagon half full of pipe. Said it was irrigation for town. Only town ain't planting anything new." "You'd swear to that?" Sam gulped. "I would if someone else stood with me." Jonah nodded. "You won't stand alone." As the crowd shifted toward the chapel steps for announcements, a hush fell. A woman in a dark traveling coat stepped down from a buckboard just outside the gate. Small-framed iron posture, keen eyes that saw everything before it was said. Judge Ellery Dean. Maddox paled half a shade. The crowd turned toward her like wheat toward storm clouds. "Didn't know she was coming," Alma murmured, suddenly beside Jonah again. "Neither did Maddox," he said. The judge lifted her hand, voice calm but carrying. "I hear there's been questions about water access and land use. I've come to observe firsthand. If anyone's claim requires clarity, I'll inspect the site. Wednesday, noon sharp." Jonah stepped forward, removed his hat. "Ma'am, I'd be obliged if you'd include Pike Wash. There's concern over recent diversions." She looked at him, then at Tala, then back. "Consider it added." Maddox offered a thin smile. "Transparency benefits all, Judge." But his gloves were off now, tucked tight in his coat pocket. His eyes no longer smiled. Wednesday had just become a deadline, and Jonah intended to meet it head-on. By Monday sunrise, Jonah Pike had filed a claim amendment with the county clerk's traveling desk, handwritten, firm, and backed by Alma's notarized witness of the 1874 ledger entry. It cited household first water priority, emergency winter protections, and an injunctive appeal pending inspection. He handed a copy to the deputy clerk himself. Then he rode home with purpose, his jaw set against the cold. At the cabin, Tala stood waiting near the porch, her shawl pulled tight, her bare hand resting gently against the siding. She could hear his horse long before it reached the gate. "You walked heavy," she said, not angry, but certain. "I filed," Jonah answered. "It's legal now. Maddox can't move another stone till Wednesday." Tala tilted her head. "He will anyway." Jonah didn't disagree. Instead, he saddled the mare again and rode the perimeter of his land with her seated behind him, her hands brushing fence posts as they passed. 1, 2, she counted softly. This post was reset. Soils looser, but not recently, far sides untouched. They circled until the light turned long and amber. That night, as frost crept along the window edges, Jonah sharpened a hand spade near the hearth and checked the oil in the lantern twice. But peace didn't hold. Sometime past midnight, the horses shrieked. Jonah was up and out the door in seconds, boots half-laced, rifle untouched. It wasn't the kind of trouble a bullet could solve. The west fence had been torn open. 3 steers were loose, their hides scratched from brush. Jonah ran, heart hammering, until he reached the garden behind the barn. A mess of hoofprints and trampled greens, carrots uprooted, frozen rows shattered by cattle hooves. Ike stumbled out from the coop, bruised and wild-eyed, one cheek swelling. "I tried to stop him," he said, voice cracking. Jonah knelt beside him. "Who?" "Buck's boys. 2 of 'em. Said I ought to learn not to be nosy. One kicked me after I yelled." Jonah steadied the boy's shoulders. "You did right." He didn't curse, didn't shout. He simply stood and looked across the black field, toward Maddox's ridgeline. This was no longer about pipe. It was a message. By dawn, Jonah had reset the fence with Alma's help. Tala brought water and gauze for Ike's face. She moved quiet, but her lips pressed thin. "They want fear," she said. "I don't give 'em that. You give them silence." "Not the same." Tala turned to him. "Then what do you give?" Jonah looked down at his hands, rough, cracked, covered in splinters and soil. "Proof," with a calm hand. She nodded slowly. "And I'll walk with you." That afternoon, he took the lantern and dug shallow along the bend where the sound had changed. Cold bit through his gloves. His fingers struck something hard beneath the thaw. Metal. Round. Too smooth for stone. He didn't uncover it yet, just marked the spot with a stake. Harlan Finch rode down near dusk and gave it a once-over. "Pipe sure as wind," the old prospector muttered. "Judge'll see it plain. But Maddox? He's gonna press till your patience cracks." "It won't." "You sure?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He looked back at the cabin where Tala's handprint still lingered on the porch beam, just above Ike's muddy boot prints. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sure." But when he checked the wash the next morning, the flow was nearly gone. Barely a trickle. Someone had cut deeper, farther upstream. He knew it without seeing. His hand closed slowly around the sealed envelope in his coat pocket. It was time to open what his father had left behind. And it was time the law heard more than just water run dry. The envelope sat on Jonah's lap as morning light pushed through the cabin window. His fingers traced the fold once, then opened it with the care of a man lifting something sacred. Inside, his father's handwriting, neat and deliberate. "Jonah, if they come for the water, dig beneath the old cottonwood, where your ma planted her iris bed. Witness names are buried there, alongside the original survey. Pike Wash runs first for home. Always has, always will. Let no man shake that truth loose." Pa. Jonah folded the letter with steady hands, heart beating like it used to during branding season. Hot, sure, but never hurried. He slipped it inside his coat just as a knock sounded at the door. Sheriff Darren Kells stood outside, boots damp with frost, expression stiff. "Jonah," he said, voice low. "Got a writ from Maddox. He's claiming obstruction under the reassignment clause. Says you're interfering with lawful access." Jonah didn't blink. "He's lying." "I know. But the writ's signed. Judge Dean's not in until tomorrow, and if I don't bring you in, Maddox'll holler bribery from the rooftops." Jonah nodded once. "Let me grab my coat." Inside, Tala stood from the table. "Is it now?" "It's all right," Jonah said, forcing calm into his voice. "Just for a night. Paper trick. Nothing more." Tala moved toward him, reaching until her hand found his arm. "You don't let him write your story, Jonah Pike." He looked into her unseeing eyes and saw more strength than most men managed with rifles drawn. "I won't," he whispered. "But sometimes you've got to sit in the wrong cell to prove the right point." The jail was cold and too clean. The iron bars creaked with every wind shift. Jonah sat on the cot, coat still on, and listened. Boots on boardwalk, horse snorts, laughter that didn't belong to men who'd earned it. Hours passed. Outside, Buck Reno strutted by twice, just to glance in. Once he tipped his hat mockingly. "You always had a way with trouble," he said through the bars. Jonah didn't answer. Then came a quieter knock. Soft, deliberate. "Jonah?" It was Alma. "She's with me," she added, and through the narrow window he saw Tala's shape behind her, wrapped in that same red shawl. Snow dusted her shoulders. She stood tall. "We're digging," Alma said. "Cottonwood by the iris bed. Your ma left good soil." Jonah stepped closer to the bars. "You sure?" Tala answered. "I felt the roots. Deep, but something box-shaped rests beneath. The ground rings hollow under my hand." Alma smiled. "We've got a pry bar, 2 lanterns, and Harlan's mule who don't spook easy. If your pa said something's there, we'll find it." Jonah nodded. "Be careful." "We're always careful," Alma said. "But tonight, we're also fast." They left without fanfare, and the rest of the night passed slow as river ice. By morning, frost had thickened on the inside of the jail window. The sheriff brought coffee and a quiet apology. "You ain't done wrong, Jonah. Just stuck between papers. You'll see the truth come Wednesday." "I hope so," Kells said. Before noon, hoofbeats clattered down Main Street. A marshal's assistant galloped past, coat flapping, and stopped at the church steps. Minutes later, Judge Dean's voice rang out. "I want Mr. Pike released immediately." The sheriff's keys didn't fumble. Jonah stepped out into the chill air, coat buttoned, chin level. Judge Dean stood waiting, her eyes sharp. "You filed a clean addendum. Maddox filed fiction." Jonah nodded. "I expect full inspection at noon tomorrow," she added. "You'll have it." That night, back at the ranch, Jonah found a tin box on the table. Mud still crusted the hinges. Inside, a folded witness list, yellowed survey notes, and a pocket watch engraved with the initials JWP. His father's watch, and proof that Pike Wash had never belonged to Cole Maddox, no matter what ink he'd spilled. Wednesday came with a clear sky and a wind sharp enough to slice through good wool. The townsfolk of Dusty Creek gathered along the edge of Pike Wash, drawn not by spectacle, but something weightier, a reckoning. Judge Ellery Dean stood at the center of it all, coat buttoned tight, hat braced against the gusts. Her presence alone quieted even the boldest tongues. Jonah Pike arrived with steady steps, his coat worn but clean, the sealed tin box tucked beneath his arm. He nodded once to the judge, then turned to the crowd. Alma stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes bright. Harlan Finch leaned on his cane, a lantern hooked on one elbow. Ike held Tala's hand, guiding her carefully over the uneven ground. Tala moved with purpose. She stopped midstream, then tilted her head. "Here," she said softly. "The sound's wrong." Flat. Something hollow beneath. Judge Dean raised a brow. "Mr. Pike?" Jonah stepped beside her, met her gaze evenly. "If you'll allow, ma'am." She nodded once. Jonah turned to Harlan. "Let's dig." Buck Reno shifted beside Maddox, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. But he didn't stop them. The pry bar struck earth, then gravel, then something solid, metal on metal. A dull clang echoed across the wash. Jonah dropped to one knee and brushed the dirt away. A rusted pipe gleamed just below the frost line. Whispers swept through the crowd. "Evidence of tampering," the judge muttered. "Hidden diversion." Maddox cleared his throat, smile too smooth. "That could have been here long before." A forgotten line. Jonah stood. "Or freshly laid by men who ride after midnight." He opened the tin box and pulled the folded list free. 17 names. Witnesses to the original Pike Wash domestic claim. Filed 1874. Priority goes to household need. By law. He handed the document to the judge, then held up the pocket watch. "Belonged to my father. Same initials as the claim. Left it with the proof buried for whoever might come after." The judge scanned the page slowly, then raised her voice. "Mr. Maddox, can you produce a sworn transfer from Mr. Pike, with a notary present at the time of contract?" Maddox hesitated. "The contract was facilitated under verbal consent, witnessed by my clerk." "Your clerk," the judge said flatly, "fled town Monday on a borrowed mare. That doesn't help your case." Snickers broke through the tension. Before Maddox could speak again, Ike tugged Jonah's sleeve. "There's another one," he whispered. "Behind the line shack." Judge Dean motioned. "Show us." Jonah, Ike, and Buck walked around the ridge to a smaller bend. There, behind a tangle of brush, lay a second cut in the land. Newly dug, still raw with shovel marks. Water trickled out, vanishing into a buried pipe that disappeared beneath Maddox's line. The crowd followed slowly, faces drawn. Judge Dean turned to the sheriff. "Deputy, note this site. We'll need measurements, statements, and charges pending." Buck dropped his gaze. Maddox stepped forward, voice harder now. "You'd take the word of a blind girl and a boy who can't read over legal documents?" Tala stepped beside Jonah. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut clear. "Sight isn't always eyes, and truth doesn't need ink." Maddox opened his mouth, then closed it. Jonah turned back to the judge. "I've done my part. The water flows, or it should." The judge gave a slow nod. "Then let's see it." She pointed to the valve junction near the buried pipe. "Open it. Now." Jonah didn't move. Buck didn't either. But then Sheriff Kells stepped forward, spat once, and grabbed the handle. The rush of water echoed through the wash like thunder returning to a thirsty land. The crowd didn't cheer. They just stood still, watching it run. Jonah looked toward Tala, who turned her face toward the sound, lips parted in a quiet smile. Justice had arrived, quiet, firm, and flowing again. The sound of water rushing through Pike Wash didn't just fill the air. It filled the town's lungs. Folks stood quiet, like they'd forgotten what justice sounded like when it came without shouting, without gunfire. Jonah Pike didn't say much. He stood near the edge of the wash, arms folded, eyes watching the clear stream run like it used to. He could feel the ground settling, not just beneath his boots, but somewhere deeper in his chest. Judge Dean broke the silence. This diversion violated territorial law. Maddox's company will face fines for tampering, back taxes on stolen water, and a hearing scheduled at the next circuit stop. Maddox's face had gone stiff. The lines around his mouth pulled tight, like he wanted to argue but couldn't find a thread to hold on to. Jonah turned toward the sheriff. "You have the list of names?" Kells nodded. "Witnesses from the original claim. Full set. Match your father's handwriting." Judge Dean looked at Maddox. "Mr. Pike's water claim holds. His household rights remain protected. His guest," she glanced at Tala, "is under the law's protection as well. You will not approach her again." That was when Buck Reno dropped his eyes. He shifted his weight, then mumbled, "Didn't know it went that far." Maddox didn't respond. The sheriff stepped forward, jaw clenched. "You'll hand over any copies of the fake contract. I'll need your clerk's testimony too, if you can find him." "He's gone," Maddox said flatly. "Then I suggest you don't leave town," Judge Dean replied. With that, the crowd began to break apart. No cheers, just a quiet dispersal, as if folks needed to go home and chew on what they'd seen. Jonah started toward his horse when the judge called his name. "One more thing." She held out the pocket watch he'd submitted in the tin box. "I recognize the mark," she said. "JWP. That watch belonged to my first court clerk, your uncle. He signed off on early Pike homestead surveys before heading west to farm. That survey included notes on water ethics. And something else." She turned the watch over and pressed the backplate. A small note, folded tight, slipped out. Jonah read it. Then read it again. "He wrote Tala's father's name," he said quietly. "Said he helped draw the earliest creek plans. His mark's on the margin." Tala had stepped forward, unsure. Jonah looked at her. "Your father wasn't just here. He was part of it." Tala's fingers trembled as she reached for the note. She didn't need to see it to believe it. She held it close, as if the paper might warm her hands the way a memory warms a cold night. Judge Dean cleared her throat. "Seems to me she's not here by accident, or mercy. She's part of this land's story, part of its claim." Jonah nodded. "And she stays. Then we're settled." Maddox stood a moment longer, shoulders drawn back like a man trying to hold on to a title that had slipped clean through his hands. Then he turned and walked. No carriage, no words, just boots crunching frost. Jonah watched him go, but only for a second. Then he looked toward Tala, who stood quiet, eyes closed, head tilted toward the sound of the creek. She spoke softly. "Feels like it's running again. Inside me, too." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. Later, as the town scattered and the sun began to warm the soil again, Jonah returned home with the tin box, the letter, and a growing sense that something broken had finally been mended. By nightfall, word had spread. Maddox's lawyer left town on a borrowed mare, coat flapping behind like a flag of surrender. Spring came early to Dusty Creek that year. Not with fanfare or flowers, but with slow water rising steady in the wash, and green shoots curling from earth that had been bruised and starved all winter. The kind of spring that made you believe in second chances, not loud, not quick, but real. Jonah Pike stepped out onto his porch with a mug of coffee, steam curling through the cool air. The fence line had been mended clean. The garden rows stretched neat and straight like handwriting on a blank page. The ground still held memory of frost, but it was loosening now. Tala stood barefoot near the edge of the creek, one hand resting on a walking stick Ike had carved her from a cottonwood branch. She was marking stones, flat ones, each laid with care, by sound and feel alone. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty. "I figure 12 steps from the porch to the edge of the garden," she said as Jonah joined her. 15 if I wander." Nothing wrong with wandering, he replied. She turned slightly toward his voice. No, but it's good to know where the water is. Ike came running around the side of the barn, waving a folded paper. His cheek had healed, though a faint bruise still traced his jaw like a badge. Miss Alma says I'm up to page 12 in that reader, he said, proud. Didn't trip on a single word today. Jonah tousled his hair. That's more than I can say for most grown men in this town. Alma herself arrived just after noon, arms full of seeds, wearing her best hat like it was Sunday, even though it wasn't. She glanced around the yard and nodded. This place is healing, she said. Feels like it's got breath again. Jonah offered her a seat. That's the idea. They ate on the porch, stew, cornbread, and blackberries Harlan Finch had traded for at the trading post. No one talked about Maddox. There wasn't much point. He'd returned under guard, just long enough to pay his fines and sign a court statement on the chapel steps, handshaking while the townsfolk watched in silence. The papers were posted, the water rights restored. But what mattered more was what didn't get written down. The creek ran. The girl stayed. And folks remembered what it looked like when mercy stood its ground. After lunch, Jonah pulled something from his coat pocket, a small cloth pouch. He set it on the table and waited. Tala touched it gently. What is it? Stone, he said, from the first bend in the wash. Where the sound changed, thought maybe it belonged closer to home. She unwrapped it slowly, held the smooth shape in her palm. I'll place it near the porch, she whispered, so I don't forget how far we came. Jonah nodded, his throat tightening just a little. That evening, as dusk crept soft across the land, Jonah lit the porch lantern and leaned against the rail. Tala stood beside him, hands folded, the red shawl still around her shoulders. You ever think, she asked, that the land chooses its people, not the other way around? I think it remembers who tends it honest, Jonah said. She smiled. Then it'll remember you. The stars came out slow, blinking through velvet. Somewhere down the wash, a frog croaked once, as if to say all was right again. And it was. Because in a land that had once turned its back on the quiet, the wounded, and the steady-handed, something had shifted. Not by force, by witness. If you believe mercy still belongs on the frontier, saddle up and ride with us again. There's always room by the fire.